Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation on Culture of Safety Best Practices. My name is Supatrai Nopakun, but I go by Nong for short. Most of you have never met me in person, so please note that this is not my picture. In this brief, we'll be discussing what is safety in an occupational context, why do we need to understand what culture of safety is, and end with some examples of some things that we can do. Before we start, we'd like to tell you a personal story. I promise that there is a point to this eventually. Back in 1992, I was a little dorky kid wearing a jumpsuit. That's because that's what you wear back in the 90s, right? My dad was a Thai diplomat, and we ended up living in the Hindu kingdom of Nepal. Nepal is home to the Himalayas and Mount Everest, the highest mountain on earth. For those of you who've never heard of Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, just know that this is where they filmed the movie, Marvel's movie Doctor Strange. On July 23rd of that year, my family flew on Thai Airways flight TG311 coming back from a family vacation on the beaches of Phuket in Thailand. 8 days later, after we returned, that same flight TG311 literally flew into the face of the Himalayan mountains. All 113 people on board were killed, including 5 of my classmates coming back from their summer break. The reason I brought this up was because this event was entirely preventable. The root cause of the crash was a lack of a shared sense of responsibility. The captain, concerned with the thick fog and a language barrier with the traffic controller, took it upon himself to do both the piloting and the navigation as well as communication tasks, dismissing the junior co-pilot. Due to the high workload and zero visibility, the captain and the co-pilot suffered from what's called spatial disorientation and made a fatal error when they inadvertently turned 180 degrees twice upon approach to the runway. The junior co-pilot tried to recalculate the direction according to the black box records, but his concern was turned down by the senior pilot. Due to a deep, really deep sense of respect and obedience according to your age and Thai culture, the co-pilot dropped his concern. This was exactly the same culture that I grew up in. The aircraft alarm eventually went off. It started saying terrain, pull up, and TG311 crashed shortly after. Well, 59 days later, Pakistan International Flight PIA 268 crashed not too far from TG311, killing all 167 people on board. My middle school teacher, a homeroom teacher, and our local higher librarian were both on board that flight. And just like TG311, that crash was also very preventable. During landing procedures, an altitude flight chart is used so that the pilots can start their multi-altitude landing approach, seen here. Ironically, there were no clipboards to hang the chart on, so the captain held the chart in his hand. He needed to follow the altitude ladder charts to land the aircraft. Unfortunately, he was holding the chart on his right hand, and he has his thumb covering the altitude that he needed to be at. So in essence, he skipped one of the altitude ladder, causing the aircraft to be 1,000 feet lower than they should be upon approach. Now imagine this, 167 lives lost because of a thumb placement on an index card. That was literally what happened. For these two accidents, it wasn't an accident caused by engine failure, it wasn't procedural errors, it wasn't some technical issues that caused the crash. It was the workplace culture. It was behavioral, it was a lack of confidence, and a lack of a sense of responsibility. It really doesn't matter if it's an aircraft factory or a hospital or a dental clinic. Safety culture is directly responsible for preventing the majority of mishaps. I can tell you that I've spent the last 15 years of my life working in aviation safety, and one of the things that I've learned is that the little things is what make the biggest differences. I believe Sherlock Holmes said something along the lines of the little things are infinitely the most important, and I find that to be very true. So now I will switch back to why we're all here. I wanted to give you a refresher on what is safety in the workplace. Safety can be defined as being free from danger. Essentially, employees are expected to be protected from harm or sickness while doing their job. This could be accomplished by reducing risks. Risk is also known as exposure to danger in terms of probability of getting hurt and the severity of getting harmed. Our goal is to protect our worker, and we do that by reducing as much risk as we can. The lower the risk, the safer we can make our workplace. This is the Heinrich Pyramid for Safety. It is a study that analyzes over 1.7 million accidents by about 300 companies in 21 industries. The report concluded that for every one fatality, there would have been at least 30 serious disabling injuries or 300 accidents from time lost from work, and 30,000 minor mishaps that have already occurred prior to that one fatality. This shows us that there's a lot of warning signs and red flags that could be addressed before that one big accident that could occur. The 300,000 number on the bottom was a ConocoPhillips study that concluded that for every fatality, there are at least 300,000 unsafe behaviors in the workplace. This model is pretty much accepted by safety professionals across the world, and it is the guide to show that we need to direct our efforts on not just the major injuries that occur, but for all significant unsafe acts. We need to learn from our unsafe acts, near misses, minor injuries, so that we can prevent the big one. This is why it is extremely important to foster a work environment where employees want to report safety concerns and issues rather than to underreport them. So, speaking of unsafe behaviors, what are some unsafe behaviors? Let's do an exercise. What kind of risk do you perceive when driving a car on the Autobahn? I'm not sure what the equivalent of the Autobahn is in Italy. So, anybody at all, please feel free to chime in. Okay, there are some things that are within our control, such as being tired, your speed, texting and driving. Here we go. Your car maintenance, not paying attention to the road, and so on. Uncontrollable risk factors are things like other drivers and external things like the weather. Some things we can do to influence or control risks, such as turning off your cell phone when using onboard systems like Apple CarPlay. My car personally has a wireless charger, so that you literally have to put your phone into the console for it to charge and connect to CarPlay. So it literally completely eliminates me from using the phone or being able to use the phone. Another thing you can do to reduce risk is to control your speed. Just show raise of hand how many of you here have ever gotten a speeding ticket. Really? Okay, I'm sorry, that was a trick question. We all live in Germany, so pretty much everybody gets a ticket, right? Yeah. This is known as the Swiss cheese model. I hope it is obvious why we call it that. It is a risk assessment tool. This model shows the importance of having a redundant and strong protective layer so that hazards do not pass through all the little holes that you see undetected and then becomes a consequence. On one end, you have a hazardous condition, let's say COVID-19 as an example. If left unchecked, it could lead to a consequence like becoming infected with adverse effect from the virus. We have barriers in place, but every control has its weakness. The more controls we have, the more chances we have of stopping the hazard from causing harm. The first slice is of implementing entering controls, which could be completed by things like isolation of employees from the virus, This could be using VTCs, team meetings, or keeping an employee behind a barrier like plexiglass in the office. The second level of control is administrative, which could be something like practicing social distancing, providing cleaning and personal hygiene products. And the last level is behavioral control, such as requiring employees to wash their hands or wear PPE like gloves and masks. This is like the last resort of control because it's very dependent on the individual rather than a system or a process or engineering. If the hazard passes through all the weaknesses and all of the control, then an incident will occur. In our case, that's being infected with COVID-19. Mitigating barriers are things that we can do to lessen the severity of the effect. For example, that would be getting the vaccine. Vaccines help reduce the probability of infection as well as help lessen the severity of being sick. In essence, it reduces the overall risks. So, so that is how the safety Swiss cheese work. Okay, culture of safety. So we're going to switch to our second topic of this presentation. Why do we care about a culture of safety? Because culture is something that we can develop as a sense of shared responsibility. It is no longer saying, that's not my problem, or someone else is going to fix it for me. When there's a weak sense of responsibility, it is credited in the workplace as the number one reason why subordinates refrain from reporting new ideas, bringing up new concerns, or voicing their opinions. Some people will tell you, I get hurt today, but that's just part of my job. This often comes from the form of minor cuts or bruises, but where does the line start and where does it end? More on this in a little bit. We want people to actually care for one another. Again, this is about having a sense of responsibility towards one another. What kind of safety record would you think happens in a place where people simply just didn't trust one another? In our profession, it's about people, right? People first. Practice is often as breeding. It sounds like a cliche, but when do you stop thinking about safety? When you're at home with your kids? I don't think so. On the battlefield? Definitely not. While you're shopping? Would you not say something just because you're off duty? Culture? In time, becoming a collective value is what we deem as a group to be important and worthy of doing. Okay, that's what culture is. Taking action. You probably heard this this word or this statement before, the bystander effect. When an emergency happens, the majority of people aren't going to call 911 or go get help because they already assumed that someone else is doing it for them. Having safety as a value would prompt you to take action whenever and wherever, just because you want to keep people safe. So you would be calling that 911, regardless of if you think everyone around you already did. So at this point, do you guys see a parallel of all these values for a culture of safety? I hope so. Yeah, I think we all recognize this song. Okay, moving on. Why do we need a culture of safety? Here we see construction workers building the Empire State Building in 1931. The engineers did a risk assessment, and if you had to guess, what would you think was the acceptable fatality rate to build the building? Anyone want to take a guess? It was accepted to have one death per number of floors. There were 102 floors in the design. Do you think that this is something that we would accept today? What do you think has changed since then? It really was a rhetorical question, but is it ever acceptable to have a fatality to accomplish work? How about a disabling injury? How about a minor injury? Where in our current culture do we draw the line? Think about that. Another example would be battlefield injuries. In the Civil War, with the liberal use of amputation, soldiers would survive if they can get themselves to the field hospitals. By Vietnam, we were using Hueys to lengthen the window of opportunities for survival. And by the wars in Afghanistan, we have established the unscientific but highly morale boosting term that was called the golden hour. Dust off helicopters would be prepped to immediately take off with a dedicated Air Force PJ paramedics to achieve that hour to pick up the wounded anywhere in theater. Today, the military is narrowing that window even more with the use of unmanned helicopters and field telesurgery conducted by robot surgical systems. This picture in the bottom left, for example, is the Cormorant drone air ambulance developed by the Israelis. And here on the left is the Fire Scout being tested for a similar project by our military. Again, the question is, why have we been trying to eliminate all the death, injury, and risk to our workforce? Well, it comes down to human nature. You've probably all heard of the Maslow hierarchy of need pyramid. On the bottom, in order to survive, we need basic things like food and shelter. Then we can secure when we can secure that. We want to have security and safety for ourselves and for our family. A lot of time, to be honest, people do it because they have to. This is where we achieve compliance, right? This is doing what we're expected to do. Once we go beyond that, this is the tipping point where people or employees start to feel a sense of belonging in an organization. People can feel the difference between a leader doing something because they have to, like compliance, versus because they want to, which is a cultural shift. In military speak, the bottom half is where we can measure performance, such as how many safety audits were conducted, how many mishaps did we correct, and so forth. The top half is where we get our measures of effectiveness. This is where we can answer questions like, are employees helping each other to stay safe? Are they inspired? Do they love working here? This is the level of key performance indicators we want to be measuring. Now we're going to switch gear a little bit to our third subject, which is sharing some best practices. These are what I've seen to be effective in influencing a culture of safety at work. This is a mix of my own work and those that I've come across in industry and in the military. Excuse me. I compiled them into 3 topics with the understanding that we in the military is an organization of learning. The Army is an institution whose competence centers around learning from its officers and enlisted in something like the after action reviews, right? So it's all about learning. The 3 key elements here are learning to see, learning to listen, learning to talk, and learning to see. So the first thing we're going to talk about is learning to listen. Okay, I have 4 kind of guides of what I've seen works that I'd like to share with you. The first one is called the check-in process. Prior to a meeting, ask each person around the room to check in. Check-ins are quick, about 10 to second per person. Ask everyone to check in. They can simply say they're checked in, or they can lay out what's on their mind at the time, like I was up all night with my new baby, or I'm distracted today for whatever reason. The key is to be totally non-judgmental. This helps the group know your mindset or each other's mindset. Maybe you know a person is distracted because their kids are sick, and you can help nudge them a little bit when the topic of the meeting is very relevant to them. This does not have to be negative either. A check-in process can also be focused on something positive that you'd like to share, like someone's birthday, or that you finished a deadline early. If you decided to do this, I would highly recommend doing it at every time you have whatever meeting you dedicated to. That way you can create a habit out of it. Okay. The next thing, the fastest way to know someone is knowing what is important to them. What are their priorities? What are they grateful for? A quick way to do this, usually doing an onboarding or a new hire training, is to ask them the question, what are the 4 things that you're grateful for? Here's my own chart as an example of how it works. So some of the things I'm grateful for, number one being my family, of course. I'm pretty sure everybody shares the same kind of family value. My hobbies, I'm a scuba diver by trade. I love diving under the ice and in deep dark caves. Travel, my wife and I travel a lot. We try to go off the beaten path whenever we can. And to serve my country, my number one thing, been a reservist for 15 years and is the best thing I've ever done. And as a bonus, I love to tell people that I love to eat. I love to eat as many different and exotic food as I can. So, okay, with this really quick, I mean, it took about 20 seconds. You guys already know a lot about me. So, this is a quick way of getting to know somebody and sharing that across the board. This is an example of a 2-minute drill. A 2-minute drill is designed so that it's a 2-minute conversation between a supervisor and a subordinate or in a group, and it's very professionally focused. So it shows where a person is at, where they want to be in their career, what their interests are, where they want to go next. So you have a more of a whole person professional view. Okay, this is called a 2-minute drill. This I call it the warrior blueprint. This is like the 2-minute drill, but it's more whole person. It's background, where you're from, your family, pretty much anything you want to share. And my last battalion, we did this and we posted all over the board so people know a lot more about each other. And I think it's very effective. Okay, feel free to reach out. I can share any of these templates with anybody that wanted. Okay, the next element is learning to talk, or as I call it, storytelling. When discussing safety topics, one of the best ways to get something across is through storytelling. As the author Janet Lederland said, want to make a point or raise an issue? Tell a story. And I really believe in that. Everyone has a story. It doesn't have to be big or in-depth, or any story would do. I told my very own story at the beginning of this presentation to let you know why safety is important to me personally and how culture can affect safety. I've also had told simpler stories. Like when I was younger, I would down 3 to 5 cans of Monsters or Rippets to drive long distances in the middle of the night for a party, right? And how I've grown up a lot since then. So everybody has a story, and we like to share it. Storytelling is very powerful. Studies have shown that words can trigger senses like taste or smell. It creates a deeper sense of empathy for the cause that you're trying to get across. If the story can be personal or based on what's called a hero's journey, which is pretty much following somebody's unique experience, it can be very powerful. I won't get into too much details for sake of time, but keep in mind, making a good story, you need to keep it short, to the point. Make sure the narrative is clear, and try to use pictures over words. A picture really is worth 1,000 words. The next element is learning to see. And 2 of the key things here are visual literacy and visual biases. Please look at this picture. What do you see is wrong with it? Okay, that's all the time I'm going to give you guys. Let me flip it for you. You see, the face was upside down, but the eyes weren't. Okay, some of you guys may know that already. Some of you guys didn't. Our brain's first reaction is to see the eyes, then correct everything around it accordingly in your mind. Crazy, isn't it? It's called visual bias. Your mind is just filling in the blanks. Okay, what is visual literacy? It's the ability to interpret visual messages over words. In French, the word for illiteracy is having no tools, such as the alphabet or syntaxes of a language. So it's literally meaning you can see visually instead of words. Okay, with visual bias, once you see something, it's very hard to unsee it. So sometimes you cannot see what's in front of you, even if you know it's there. In this picture, can you guys spot Mike Swarovski, the guy from Monster Inc.? He's got one eye. Okay, it's very difficult to see safety because it's the status quo. Here's Mike. Normal becomes the new noise to a potential hazard. We need to see past the safe conditions. So the little three-eyed alien is safe conditions. Mike is the one hazard, and it's extremely hard to see because you're visually already biased towards the safe conditions. So it's really hard to focus by something else. As you can now see, no pun intended, hazard identification is easily influenced by prior experiences. We see what's right. We see what right looks like, and now our brains focuses on those, what looks right. Visual bias fill in the blanks so that it becomes very easy to gloss over details. Being visually aware can help work not automatically fill in details from your prior experience. Using tools such as risk assessment, job hazard analysis, or even using a battle buddy during a safety audit really helps overcome these visual biases. Okay, well, that's it for my slide. Thank you, everyone. This concludes my brief. I only have 40 minutes, so these are just the highlights. I want you all to know that I can send you anything you saw here today, like the Warrior Blueprint or the 2-minute drill, if you'd like to use it in your organization. I can help setting up and showing it to your organization on how to effectively use it. Also, please reach out to any of the topics you heard today. They're actually the highlight of presentations that I have in my hip pocket. So if you want, I could do a more in-depth presentation on any of those subtopics that we saw today. Okay, I'll hold on for a little bit if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, what's listed up here is my contact information, and I really appreciate your time today, everybody. Thank you.